Welcome everyone to the March 2025 meeting of the Parrot Club. Tonight we are pleased to have Dr. Wenfei Tong talk to us about bird love and the extraordinary range of mating systems in the avian world. Dr. Tong is a biologist with a passion for understanding and conserving the natural world. She enjoys sharing her love of birds and biology through her paintings, photography, teaching, and writing. Her delightful books, Bird Love and Understanding Bird Behavior, use scientific discoveries to show how much humans and birds share, including some of literature's most basic themes. Her ultimate aim is to inspire as many people as possible to care for and thus protect nature. She grew up in Singapore, where she started birding at age 12. She first got hooked on field biology as an undergraduate at Princeton and Oxford, and has a PhD in evolutionary biology from Harvard. She's guided natural history tours in Tanzania, the Galapagos, and Montana, where she's active in the conservation community and takes visitors birding on horseback. She now works at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology in Ithaca, New York. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Tong.
Thank you so much, Amy, and thank you everyone for having me. Before I start, I just wanted to, in the interest of time, take a poll, I suppose, from all of you as to whether or not you'd like me to do what I typically do, which is a bit more of a bird watcher focused stories about bird behavior, anecdotes, and with a parrot focus. Uh, versus more of what I do with my day job nowadays, which is to help produce short films in the service of conservation organizations. And I have a short film that we just produced about scarlet macaws in Mexico. It's this very special subspecies that's more endangered than the main subspecies you're familiar with from different places. And I think if I were to screen that and talk about that, that could take up a lot of the time. So, any idea, maybe show of hands or something in the chat about which you'd like me to focus on?
I think maybe the bird love. I actually
Okay.
heard that talk at it's one of the California Audubons. That's how
Yeah. Okay.
such a delightful talk. And maybe we can do another program in the future with the scarlet macaws.
Absolutely. And what I'll do is send you the link,
Sure.
Amy, and if there's time, you can ask me questions about that later. It's just a very cool,
Video.
um, yeah.
And if you wanted to show, a couple minutes of the video to kind of get whet people's appetites, that's also great too.
I'll show you the website. Thank you. That's
Thank
a
you.
good, very helpful answer to the question. So, as Amy said, I've long been a bird lover, and I've started just illustrating this talk with a lot of my own pictures so that I don't have to worry so much about copyrights and things. And since we're in March and I'm hearing a lot of breeding birds starting to sing and feel it starting to feel like spring, I put some warblers on and I think most of us are in the Northeast. So these should be warblers that some of us will be seeing quite soon if you're bird watchers. But I've started titling this talk Why Identify with Birds, because I've gotten a little tired of the very hardcore bird watcher that just wants to identify birds all the time. And then it's like, tick, and next one on the list. And how many birds can I see in my county? But I realize after meeting all your parrots that I'm preaching to the choir here, that all of you clearly identify with birds, probably more than I do myself. And along the lines of muting, this is a picture of, I don't have a parrot at home that I live with, but I've had the privilege of growing up in Singapore and seeing the red jungle fowl, which is another really colorful bird, get successfully reintroduced. And I do have as a very vocal member of the house, my son. I gave a talk, a Zoom talk last week, and I couldn't mute because I was giving the talk, and he came in the last 5 minutes and sort of told me that it was time to go to dinner. So apologies in advance if he does appear at some point. I think his father's trying to corral him, but you never know. But so much of the climate, even before the most recent events, have made it very clear to me that one of the beauties about birds is this ability to connect with other people and to raise the importance of listening and building trust with others across species, not just within our own species. But it feels like a very good time to also build trust within our own species. And this is just a picture I took that reminds me of how much I love watching birds because they can fly and because they're so visible. So this is a yellow warbler that I took when bird watching in Massachusetts when I was doing my PhD. And they also astonish us with their feats of behaviors, such as these snow geese that were migrating when I lived in Montana. And, like parrots, snow geese tend to bond for a long time. So it's remarkable that so many of these birds make this tremendous migration in such numbers and stick with their long-term, go back to their long-term partner. And a lot of what I try to do is reconnect with nature and when I can, and reconnect other people with nature as well. And this is just a picture of one of my undergraduate field sites in Kenya, where I got to see a remarkable bird called the gray-capped social weaver, which builds little nests, almost like their own subdivision or something. So they all nest near each other, and sometimes they help each other care for the chicks. And also just that birds are such good indicators of what's going on. So this is a Western meadowlark, but with things like eBird that the Bird Lab of Ornithology produces, we can take all the citizen science data that people submit and turn that into data on patterns on which birds are declining and where. So the aim is to have that across the world, including for rarer birds like some of the parrots, wild parrots. And coming from a background of evolutionary biology, this is just a bit of background about what boggled my mind early on. The eggs that you see on the right are mostly laid by different females of a single species. So just this general question that a lot of evolutionary biologists are motivated by about what generates this sheer diversity and beauty in the natural world, ranging from eggs to these nests, which if you look at from the side, on the left-hand side, the nest is barely distinguishable. It just looks like a bunch of grass. And this is one of the species that laid the eggs in the picture I showed you earlier. It's a cisticola. It's a type of Eurasian and African grassland bird. And it's just such an amazing feat of camouflage that this bird stitches its nest together with spider's webs from the inside, made out of growing grass stems. So the picture on the right is the same nest viewed from above. And you can see that this bird has just woven this amazing little deep cup nest out of growing grass stems, so that if you were a person walking through the grassland, you would pretty much not notice it. It's really hard to find these nests, but we had to for the eggs. But just marvelous adaptations like this, which most parrots don't have to do because they nest in holes, as you know. Just the architecture of birds is also amazing. And this is just a drawing that I did because I was trying to learn all the dinosaurs. So you probably know that birds are the only living lineage of dinosaurs left on our planet now. And it was much easier for me to teach my son the backyard birds, but when it came to the dinosaurs, I was a bit flawed. So this is my cheat sheet. And some other sketches I've been doing is just enjoying, especially during the pandemic when I lived in New York City, observing a lot of the behaviors of the everyday backyard birds. So I don't, as someone who doesn't have a pet bird of my own to live with, it's just really lovely to have a window into the everyday lives of the birds around me. And just this morning, actually, I remember being really taken by a pair of courting cardinals. And the male was shimmying along a telephone wire, singing away. And cardinals are one of the few songbirds we know have females sing as well as males, which is a very understudied subject, just female song in general. Where I come from with all this is, I guess, identifying with other species from very early on. So on the right is a bunch of animals that I drew as a acknowledgement slide in my PhD talk, at the end of my PhD talk, where it's customary to have photographs of all the people you want to thank. And some of these are very old holdovers, like associating my mother with a Doberman Pinscher or my father with a tiger. But these are the old associations. And I didn't have photographs of people, so I just drew animals for them instead. And yeah, on the right is just some thank you cards and a helmet for my son, who's named Martin after the bird, to associate people with birds. But this is all to come to say that, you know, both growing up and through reading a lot of books, including different sorts of literature, and then discovering the scientific evidence for a shared evolutionary history, I just felt like there was a strong argument to be made for showing why it's okay to have and feel this deeply shared connection with other species, including birds. One of my favorite anecdotes there is that pigeons will feed their offspring a type of milk, but they produce it from their crops, so it's crop milk. And one of the hormones that underlies the letdown of crop milk by pigeons is an evolutionary molecular relative of oxytocin, which mammals use for milk letdown as well as bonding. So that's a piece of sort of deep evolutionary history. And you'll notice that I've got keas on the cover of Bird Love. It wasn't intentional, but I love the fact that there are keas because they're one of my favorite birds. And I think it does sum up the fact that, for those of you who might not have seen the book, the title might be a bit misleading because the whole point of the title and the book is to show that there are two sides to love, that it's not all sweetness and light, that a lot of love involves, like Greek myths or Egyptian history or Roman history, a lot of tension and conflict as well as the sweeter moments involved in love. And so I love the fact that there's this pair of keas which don't look entirely kind. There's a glint in the eye that implies they're also very sharp and very smart and can play each other in a sense politically. And yeah, I'll talk a bit more about keas later in the story. Another bird that's just super intelligent that I like to use as an example is the raven, because we often read about scientists showing that ravens form these long-term mated pairs, and long-term mated pairs have a territory which they guard carefully, and they do a great job of raising their offspring and, you know, forming this territory. But the darker side to that success story is that these, what I call power couples of ravens, will also systematically keep track of all the younger raven pairs in the area. And they don't really care about the super young teenagers doing their thing, figuring things out. But if someone starts to get a bit threatening, like they might depose the power couple, then the power couple definitely steps in and intentionally sabotages, will chase and, you know, rip out the feathers and sort of disrupt the forming, strengthening pair bond between a younger couple, so that they minimize the competition. So I find that just this fascinating example of the dual sides of what long-term pair bonding can result in. In terms of the courtship examples I discuss, we've got everything from these lekking species like the chickens, the grouse, different grouse species, which is the kind of system you see, mating system you see with very flashy birds like birds of paradise, which is interesting because parrots are very, very flashy and colorful typically, but also long-term pair bonded, unlike a lot of these other showy species, where it's typically males that display and attract females for mating. And then the female goes and does all the hard work of raising the chicks, making the nest, everything else. And with this kind of lekking system, it's a real winner takes all strategy. So I liken it to a rock concert or something where, the most attractive males, in some cases females, but typically males, get most of the offspring in the next generation, and everyone else is just ignored. And I just found the example on the left, which I've illustrated as black grouse, as one of the most intriguing, just inspiring, really, early examples of experiments in animal behavior, where biologists were thinking, okay, what is it that causes a male to be the most attractive male, and how do females make their choices about who to invest their genes with? And it turned out to be very much a case of following fashions, following each other, almost like social media following or something. So what the biologists did was have a bunch of taxidermied females and cluster them around a male who wasn't actually attracting a lot of attention. And through doing that, they found that all the real live females sort of looked at this male and thought, oh, that guy's getting a lot of attention. Let's go and pay attention to him too. And he just they experimentally created this crowd of females, and he ended up being quite a heartthrob from being nothing. So that's one way of doing it. But I did want to mention that kakapo is another New Zealand parrot, which you're probably familiar with. Very, very interesting species, nocturnal and quite hard to see, I think, in the wild. I've never seen one, and highly endangered. They also form leks, interestingly, which is unusual for a parrot, I think. And in some lekking systems, like elk and red deer, to take a mammalian example, females tend to invest in, if the mother is very well resourced and feeling very fit, she'll invest in the very high risk, high reward offspring, which in both these cases is a male. Whereas if she wants to sort of hedge her reproductive bets, if she's not feeling so great that year, she tends to produce more females, more daughters. And so with kakapos, it seems like they have this ability as well. The mothers have this ability to decide on the sex of the offspring. And so with captive breeding programs, the females were so well fed that they kept making sons. There weren't that many eggs with daughters. How the birds do this is not known. How elk do this is not known either. But the fact that a female can sort of produce more sons or more daughters is really interesting in some of these systems. So on the other side of the spectrum, we've got birds more like parrots, or in this case, barn swallows, where both sexes choose their mate. It's a mutual decision. And I won't go into the details, but there's an explanation about why barn swallows, which are found all over the world, look different in different parts of their range. And the short answer is they're geographically specific fashions that both sexes are following. So, in North America, the birds prefer someone with a very ruddy, rusty looking breast feather color pattern. And in Europe, they prefer someone with longer tails. So that accounts for some of the geographic differences you see within a species. We've also got birds like hornbills or many parrot species that are long-term pair bonded, where both parents take care of the chicks. when they hatch, and both parents are very involved in all the work it takes to raise these usually fairly difficult to raise, demanding, you're going for quality, not quantity of offspring. And another chapter deals with the living arrangements that birds come up with. So here I've just got a couple of typical nesting birds, gray-capped social weaver and an American robin that I took doing a bit of house cleaning. So a lot of songbirds will take what we call a fecal pellet from a fecal sac from the chicks and remove it before it soils the nest. It's a very tidy way of dealing with things. I'm not sure what captive parrots do in this situation, actually. So I'd love to know from all of you. But also with species like a lot of parrots that have a very limited resource in terms of the right holes, the right size and the right height above the ground and that kind of thing in which to nest, the nest hole becomes a very limiting resource. And there are some species, I think crimson rosellas and green-rumped parrotlets have been documented to fight over these nest holes and sometimes kill the offspring of the chicks of other parrot pairs to get access to those nest holes. So I think of this as highly limited real estate and a lot of competition for limited nest holes. And a really interesting story from Melanesia is these parrots called eclectus parrots, where the females are in this case, much showier sex. So the females are very striking red and blue color, and the males tend to be a much more well camouflaged green. And the females are the dominant sex, and they tend to display to attract males. And the best sort of explanation for this pattern is that the nest holes are so in such short supply that really there aren't enough for all the females around. So a female will establish a nest hole and then have a retinue of up to 7 males assisting her in they're all fathers of the offspring, and they all start assisting and cooperating to tend the young that she lays that she has in that one nest hole. So it's a fascinating system of child rearing in parrots. And this sort of raises the next question of, in some species, is it possible for just one parent to be left holding the chicks? Or is it, why is it that in some species you need both parents, and in other bird species in particular, you can leave one parent to handle the kids once they're hatched? And with a lot of birds, including parrots, that invest in quality, not in quantity, you typically need both parents. So one extreme is the Laysan albatross, where one parent just can't raise chicks off successfully on its own. So in the case where a male is not available or something, you get a lot of female-female pairs of Laysan albatross successfully forming pair bonds and raising the chick, the single chick together as a couple. But with a lot of shorebirds like these plovers, it's the chicks hatch so much more independent. They're called precocial rather than altricial chicks, that only one parent is enough to raise the chicks, in which case whoever gets to abscond first and has a higher chance of remating tends to be the sex that absconds, and then the other sex has to stay behind. And in some species like these snowy plovers, it can be either male or female that tends to be left behind depending on the population. Which reminds me a bit of humans. And also they're just birds that, like these greater roadrunners, that form long-term pair bonds. This is a card I did for my husband because he's from Texas, and there's lots of greater roadrunners in Texas. But one of the anecdotes, bits of evidence I find very sweet with greater roadrunners, and I don't know if parrots do this, is the males actually put in more than the females into bringing food to the nestlings. And so they start off, the breeding males end up having more conspicuous fat deposits than the females, almost like they need to stock up for the difficult times of provisioning coming up. And they tend to provide more and larger prey items to the kids. We've also got what happens, like once the chicks hatch, they're obviously not passive recipients of all the care. They have a bit of a mind of their own. So one of the chapters or subheadings is heirs and spares, because a lot of birds of prey and some of the herons and egrets will have the strategy of staggering when they incubate their eggs. They start incubation the moment the first egg is laid, so that that egg hatches into the largest chick, and the last egg to be laid hatches into the smallest chick. And this is a way of having what biologists call the insurance chick. So that if the earlier eggs are addled for some reason, you always have a backup, but you're not expecting as a parent to always raise all the offspring. And there's a certain amount of siblicide or infanticide associated with this. One of the, back to the eclectus parrots, it's also because, with eclectus parrots, the females have a choice about which sex of offspring they would like to keep going. If a female isn't getting enough help from the male or males in that should be assisting her, she may sometimes kill some of the chicks, the parrot chicks, to keep things going, to make sure that there's enough food for the remaining ones. Back to I guess a more relatable, hopefully, story about parrots. I thought it was really interesting to read this paper about keas, where they do a lot of learning and experimenting. They're one of the examples of birds that are highly intelligent and use tools. So it's nice to learn from your parents a bit, but they also appear to have a very context-dependent way of communicating with adults in a Kia group. So it sounds like 2-year-olds, so Kias, I should back up and say Kias take a long time to mature and don't usually get fully independent till they're about 5 years old. So 2-year-old Kias probably behave a bit like 2-year-old humans, I imagine, where they have special appeasement behaviors and they do a lot of begging, really, from the adults in the group. Whereas by the time they reach 4 or 5 and they're a bit more independent, they just steal food from adults in the group. They don't bother to look all helpless and appealing and really say please and whatever it takes to wheedle food out of an adult. Some of the other behaviors I discuss not in bird love, but in the second book, Understanding Bird Behavior, is just cool examples of how birds find food or get food. So this is a Egyptian vulture I had the pleasure of knowing, named Vulci, not very imaginative, but Vulci was one of the featured individuals in, I think, a really early paper on tool use by a non-primate. And that was also written by Jane Goodall of chimpanzee fame. But just really interesting wild behavior of Egyptian vultures using rocks to crack open ostrich eggs. And now we know all sorts of behaviors and examples of tool use, including crows and keas. But I just thought this was a really charismatic individual. And sorry. Also, keas have been shown to be smart enough to pass these tests, almost IQ tests that people who study birds like to give birds, where they use stick tools to retrieve food rewards. So this is something that people like to test parrots and crows and other smart birds with. This is just a great blue heron because most of us have seen a lot of great blue herons, and I was very struck by the way this individual was carefully patrolling the long grass until it suddenly shot its bill down and came up with a ground squirrel. And I got to watch this great blue heron, fly off with the ground squirrel and have trouble swallowing the ground squirrel. But it was one of those examples where it was just such a privilege to be able to watch a bird so intimately that was in the wild. And it made me feel like it would be lovely to have a bird at home that I could watch all the time. This is a story about the evolution of sweet taste receptors, but I think in the interest of time, maybe I'll skip it for now. How is everyone else feeling?
Well, the more the better, but we don't want to keep you here all night, so it's up to you.
Why don't I do this one and then I'll take and then I'll go into the cockatiel story, which I forgot. And then we can take questions. So I this is more of a molecular example, but I really like it as an example of evolutionary convergence and just how biologists nowadays with genomics tools can look at all levels of behavior. So on the left, you have two birds called which are sunbirds, which you only find in Africa and Asia. And they're very convergent. They've kind of evolved independently the same look and strategy and way of life as hummingbirds, which are the two you see on the right. But you only see hummingbirds in the New World, in North and South America, and you only see sunbirds in Africa and Asia. And the closest relative to hummingbirds is actually the swift. So they're really very different lineages of birds. But in both cases, they feed on a lot of nectar. And so this begs the question of how you evolve a bird that mostly likes sugar so that it is attracted to and survives on sugar. And the answer there is this friend of mine, Maud Baldwin, looked at the taste receptors in things like swifts, which are the closest relative to hummingbirds. And most birds, including swifts, do not have a sweet taste receptor. So they can't taste sweetness, they can't taste sugar, which doesn't make sense if you mostly live on nectar. And I would love to know the answer to this for parrots. I don't think we know the answer yet. But some parrots eat nectar too, so you would expect a sweet taste receptor. And TB, like, stay tuned, basically. But the answer for hummingbirds is that in an early hummingbird, since they split from swifts, there was a second copy of the umami taste receptor. So umami is the flavor that you get with soy sauce, it's meat, all that kind of yummy, savory, meaty flavor is umami. And that receptor was copied in the genome of the swift in an early hummingbird. And the second copy allowed it to kind of do its own thing without compromising the ability to taste umami. And that is what gave rise to the sweet taste receptor in modern day hummingbirds. So it's just a very cool example of evolution at the molecular level that underlies behavior we all see every day. Shall I do the cockatiel, what I remember of the cockatiel story?
Yes.
So that was just back to the pair bonding, but seeing someone's cockatiel made me think of it. Um, it was a bit heartbreaking, but I think the experiment involved basically asking the question of, how long can you keep a cockatiel couple apart before they really, or like what do cockatiels that are pair bonded do when they start really missing each other? And the take home was it takes quite a long time um to break them up, and that they obviously miss each other a lot. And I think this will be no surprise to all of you, but it was a bit painful for me to read the very, very dry description of the experiments and be thinking, oh no, these poor cockatiels were not getting to see each other for a while, just so that they're missing each other could be documented. So yeah, I think you don't need to know that your birds form very strong pair bonds, but they obviously do. Maybe I should end on a happier note, which is I recently saw a very good play about Dr. Irene Pepperberg, who is famous for teaching Alex, the African gray parrot, and then other parrots, how to talk so that she could really understand how their brains worked, and showed that, beautifully elegantly, because you can't teach dolphins and chimpanzees and elephants to talk, but you can teach parrots to talk, and showed that they're capable of all these amazing cognitive just concepts, like what's the same, what's different, what's not there. Um, yeah, just wonderful. So I don't know if anyone's seen this play, but I could, you're nodding, Amy.
Yes, actually, Nicole, who's in chat, and I went to see it twice.
Nice.
So it was fabulous. It was in Boston.
Yeah, I think that's where I saw it too, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, about almost a year ago now, in April last year, I think. Um, yeah, it- I think I'd be happy to take questions. I'll try and jump to this is the group that I was talking about with the scarlet macaws. If it's showing up, is it showing up?
It is. Natura Ecosistemas Mexicanos.
Yeah, so if you Google Natura Mexicana, it should come up.
Yes. Yeah, I'll just
Um,
out of that
the,
one, Nicole.
the film we made is on the homepage. It's typically how we do things, is to make something for a group and then let them use it.
How long is the film?
It's only about 8 minutes, so I could play it.
Yeah, if you want to show that now, that would be fine.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay, fabulous.
Oops, sorry.
La guacamaya roja es una de las aves emblemáticas, hermosas por sus colores, por su tamaño, por su forma de comportarse. Es sociable, es simpática.
Estamos ubicados en la parte sur de la Reserva de la Biosfera Montes Azules, en el estado de Chiapas, México. Es la región que se conoce como la Selva Lacandona. Yo lo describiría como un lugar maravilloso, mágico. Es una región que se caracteriza por tener un ecosistema muy rico en biodiversidad, que es la selva tropical húmeda. Y es de los pocos lugares en nuestro país, en México, donde todavía podemos encontrar este ecosistema que no ha sido alterado.
La selva lacandona brinda servicios ecosistémicos para todos, desde la captación del agua, producción de oxígeno y, por supuesto, toda la belleza que tiene, ¿no?, la selva con su diversidad.
Esta región es muy especial para México, por supuesto, para Chiapas, para quienes aquí habitan, pero también para México y para el mundo. 70 de cada 100 especies que hay en el mundo se concentran en los trópicos. y justamente en este tipo de ecosistemas.
Sin embargo, no solo se trata de tener la selva, sino también que haya vida silvestre en ella. Y la guacamaya es una pieza fundamental porque es una especie bandera y es una especie indicadora de la calidad del hábitat.
La guacamaya es el símbolo. La guacamaya necesita del hábitat. La guacamaya necesita de la selva. Teníamos menos guacamayas que se observaban. Y entonces inicia el proyecto Recuperación de la Guacamaya Roja.
La guacamaya roja está amenazada principalmente por dos factores, que es la pérdida de su hábitat, que ha sido destruido sistemáticamente por décadas en nuestro país. La distribución original de la guacamaya roja se extendía por toda esa zona. Sin embargo, la pérdida de su hábitat ha reducido la presencia de esta especie a solamente la cuenca del río Lacantún, que es donde estamos en este momento. Es el último bastión de la guacamaya roja en México. También está muy amenazada por el tráfico ilegal, porque sigue habiendo una demanda muy importante por estos animales a nivel mundial. Nosotros llevamos a cabo el monitoreo, rescate y manejo de pichones que están amenazados por el tráfico ilegal. Entonces, lo que hacemos nosotros es que trabajamos de la mano con las comunidades, nos llaman, monitoreamos los nidos y durante la temporada de reproducción rescatamos los nidos que tienen historial de saqueo.
Es algo para nosotros importantísimo y de mucho valor, pues, el que cuidemos estas riquezas que tenemos. Y hay que cuidar nuestras selvas, hay que cuidar las especies que están en riesgo, porque la verdad, somos muy afortunados en tener esta especie.
Entonces, a lo largo de estos años hemos logrado reintegrar y proteger más de 250 pichones guacamayas, que ahora son individuos juveniles y adultos que se han reintegrado a la población silvestre y que forman parte ya de esta población.
Trabajar con Natura Mexicana, la verdad, es algo para mí, en especial, pues muy bonito, muy especial, porque he aprendido muchas cosas. Pues sí quisiera que más personas hicieran conciencia del cuidado que se necesita de la flora y fauna y que eso nos beneficia a todos, tanto como los que estamos ahorita, como a las futuras generaciones.
Natura y Ecosistemas Mexicanos tiene muy claro que la alternativa para poder resolver las grandes crisis ambientales tiene que ser a partir de un trabajo de transformación local. Lo que hagamos nosotros sin la gente no tiene sentido. Por eso es que hemos estado encontrando proyectos que permita que la gente pueda tener sus ingresos y su empleo sin destruir la selva.
Bueno, creo que las comunidades locales tienen este papel muy importante.
Aquí le haces así, hasta que se mire clarito.
Los guacaguardianes son jóvenes y niños de las comunidades de Marqués de Comillas, quienes monitorean, protegen y observan a las guacamayas. Y esto creemos que ha logrado un sentido de apropiación y en ellos, y sentirse orgullosos de tenerlas en su comunidad. Si los conoces, las entiendes y las vas a proteger, ya es algo por lo que vale la pena luchar.
Por eso nos hace muy tristes el ver a las guacamayas en jaulas. Las guacamayas no pueden ser mascotas. Las guacamayas tienen que volar, tienen que estar libres. Entonces, para nosotros, verlos volar siempre es un motivo de enorme satisfacción. Yo habré visto miles y miles de veces a las guacamayas en distintos números por distintos lados y siempre me sorprenden.
Very good film.
Thanks, everyone.
And not to get, not to get, not to get political, but I do need to point out one thing that USAID, which is now basically defunct, funds a lot of projects like this that help with parrot conservation. They have funded a lot of projects where rangers get, former poachers get supplemental income to be rangers to protect parrots from being poached. So with those funds gone now, I wouldn't be surprised if we see an increase in parrot poaching. And at the very least, I recommend that if you can, to step up and provide funds to organizations like this to help protect parrots in the wild.
Thanks.
we have the
We actually made this partly for them for this group to show international donors. So yeah, I thought your group would be especially helpful for.
Yeah, I will share this link to people when I post the video as well.
And Julia, for context, Julia Carabias, the woman who was in that film, is just a real, she's really impressive. I think she was a minister for the environment at some point, and you know, she's almost 80 and she's still in the forest all the time. And she was kidnapped at one point. And then the kidnappers let her go because she explained that she was there trying to save these parrots in the rainforest. And they were like, "Oh, all right, go ahead. We don't want to be bad to you."
I think I might have read something about it recently because I remember reading
Do
about
you
this.
subscribe to Living Bird, the Lab
Yes.
of Ornithology? Okay, there's an article about this group and about her.
Yeah, I remember that story. Basically, they kidnap all these people, and when what she was doing, they were like, "That's wonderful. Please leave. Go help our birds," which is
Yeah.
not expect from people who kidnap you in the middle of.
It's sort of exactly what you want to see from community-led conservation.
Yes. Yeah, very much. All right. Well, that was wonderful, and I want to open up the questions. I have to ask that. So you start with that bird with all the different eggs.
Yeah.
I've never seen anything like that. Any hypothesis to why
Yes.
that happened?
Sorry, it's a really long story. And I just saw in the chat someone asked if I hatched the eggs. So not those, I'm afraid, but the reason behind all that diversity is the species is what we call a brood parasite. So what I was interested in is this behavior where birds outsource the childcare to either a different unrelated member of the same species, like many ducks, or a completely unrelated species, which is what you see there. So, for instance, brown-headed cowbirds in North America laying their eggs in all sorts of other species' nests and sometimes causing a big conservation problem with things like Kirtland's warblers. So this particular bird that I was studying is called the cuckoo finch and lives in sub-Saharan Africa. And its evolutionary relationship, it's been doing this brood parasitism behavior for much longer than brown-headed cowbirds, like millions of years. So what results is an arms race between the brood parasite and the birds that it needs to somehow trick into accepting its eggs, there's a much more sophisticated arms race that's happened. So if I were to take the brown-headed cowbird as an example, that's what we call a generalist brood parasite. So all brown-headed cowbirds lay similar eggs that don't really match in any particular host species. And most of the host species aren't very discriminating. They would probably, if you gave them a marble to sit on, they would sit on a marble and they would incubate the marble. But over time, you can imagine that if the brown-headed cowbird chicks are sort of deadly enough to the host chicks, that any host parents that figure out how to get rid of the mismatched eggs would have more kids. And so that's the first step in this arms race, where you then see the host parents, the host species get very discriminating, which then selects on the parasite to lay eggs that are a good imitation, a good mimic, a good forgery of the host eggs so that they don't get chucked out or abandoned. And then if that goes on for even longer, which is what happens with these cuckoo finches that I was studying, then sometimes the parasite has to branch out to try a different species to parasitize that's a bit more naive. But then the whole process starts again. So then you get the whole discrimination and then ever better mimicry by the parasite to get around that discrimination. And it's gotten so advanced with the cuckoo finch that one of the main host species has evolved to have different females lay very different backgrounds and very different spotting patterns. Almost like if you imagine trying to forge banknotes, the more different watermarks and features you put on your banknotes, the harder it is for the forgeries to look realistic and to look like a good match. So everyone's got their own banknote complex pattern going. And the parasite is now having to try and mimic all these different suites of specific, distinctive individual signatures.
And that's amazing. So I would guess that the host bird lays some eggs first before the finch lays its eggs. So then the finch can observe what the egg looks like.
That would be so smart.
Like they have a series of spray painting nozzles, and
Wouldn't that be great?
and then they're forging, and they mix their paint to match.
Yeah.
I mean, that's incredibly.
So that would be that would be the best way to do it. They don't do that.
Okay.
Basically, every female, I think if you have chickens, you'll see this with chickens. Every female, either host or parasite, pretty much lays her signature egg. So if you're someone who lays a bluish green background with, speckles concentrated on the narrow end of the egg, that's pretty much your signature. And the parasite, the cuckoo finch, isn't quite smart enough in this case to watch for the correct host to lay her eggs in within the host species. But they do parasitize. They do parasitize about 5 hosts, different species in that one Zambian ranch that I was looking at the birds in. So the cuckoo finches are, I don't know if smart is the right word, but they do only focus, an individual female cuckoo finch who is specialized on a particular species of host will only lay her eggs in that host species nests. And there it might be, a case of going back to where she hatched, the species that she hatched from. And all the different host species make nests that look quite different. So that's how you could, as a female, tell the difference. But the within host species variation, where different females of one Prinia species are laying different colored eggs, that has made life very difficult for the cuckoo finch. They just have to take their chances.
Well, then maybe they should just raise their own babies and be done
They,
with it.
they maybe should, but they've completely evolutionarily forgotten how to make a nest. I don't think they would know the first thing about how to do it anymore.
Well, that's the problem with the cowbirds. They used to follow the bison, so they had good reason to drop their eggs and go. But now they're stationary, but they're still doing this behavior, which is why they're sort of universally hated by people. But and of course they were even nastier because they don't even care if their eggs look like the host, because if the host tries to get rid of one of their eggs, they'll push the host eggs out and kill them. So
Yeah,
it's
I
kind
mean,
of like the little birdie mafia here, you know?
yes, yes. Although there is another, it can be quite fascinating in some other species. There's a bird called the great spotted cuckoo in Europe, that sometimes parasitizes equally large or larger birds like magpies, which you would think would be smart enough to figure this out and get rid of the cuckoo eggs, and they often do. But then there is a mafia situation where the cuckoos monitor what the magpies are doing, and they see that the magpies are chucking the cuckoo eggs out, and the cuckoos come and destroy the magpie nest because the magpies didn't raise the cuckoo.
Right. Yeah,
So
but
there's a real mafia situation
it's
going,
kind of
and as Amy said, the cowbirds sometimes do this too. Yeah, it's fascinating. And then there are situations where the cuckoos might actually be quite good for the magpies. So in that case, because the chicks are so evenly matched, that some magpie chicks sometimes survive. It's not a case where the parasite chicks are so much bigger, or in some cuckoo species, the mother cuckoo, before she lays her own egg, gets rid of the host eggs. So that's like a non-starter. But in the greater spotted cuckoo and magpie situation, you sometimes have both growing up alongside each other, host and parasite. And sometimes it's quite helpful to have the cuckoos there because they get eaten up first by a predator
oh dear.
because they're so noisy.
That's funny.
Yeah, and there amazing other stories like these other birds called superb fairy wrens in Australia being parasitized by a completely different lineage of cuckoo, teaching their chicks a special begging password through the eggshell when the mother is incubating.
Oh,
And she'll also teach the rest of the group of adults that will help feed those chicks when they're hatched. They also learn the password. So the cuckoos are the only ones who don't learn that password when mom's incubating. And then they don't pass the test, so they don't get fed.
oh my.
Ooh, I know.
That could be a whole book on host parasite bird relation.
Yeah.
It could be a movie, an
I
animated.
thought I'd better not go there because I'd talk all night about it if we were to food
What?
parasites and
Yeah,
hosts.
I do have to say, oh, and that's the story about the cockatiels. That just breaks my heart. I mean, that's how can you do that to these birds? I mean, I've been through that where birds have lost their mates, and it's horrendous. And man, when
It's partly why I don't really, why I stopped doing research because it's so much of this.
yeah, I mean, this little guy, when his mate died, he didn't get to see the body. So if at all possible, try to get them to see the dead bird. But he for 6 weeks he was just in really bad shape. He was so despondent, and he didn't really come out of it. It took a solid 6 weeks for him to even move on and to act normally. So, God, I can't imagine intentionally doing that to one of our parrots. I mean, that's like torture. I mean, that's really mental torture.
Oh, sure, yeah, I agree.
A little dropping, right? Yeah. The other guy's sitting on my shoulder, but because of the Zoom background, all you see is his toes.
Oh,
Do we have some questions? If people want to raise their hands, come on camera, put questions in chat, please feel free to. I'm now getting bitten on the back of my head, so Yeah. I put in the chat your 2 books. I haven't read the bird behavior one. I read Bird Love, and again, delightful book, beautiful pictures. You're a very talented artist. I mean, you could just illustrate bird books or
I would love to. I'm not a professional.
a children's bird book would be
Love
wonderful.
that. Yeah, it'd be fun.
They always recommend when you're out bird watching to keep a journal and to draw pictures of the birds. And then people show off these wonderful pictures, and I thought, well, how does that work if you're not good at drawing? I mean, not like your pictures. If I try to draw a picture of a bird, it's going to look kind of like a stick figure.
I mean, I guess that's fine. That's beautiful too. I don't know if any of you have seen these really lovely Picasso line drawings. They're very simple, but I think I find that if people are uninhibited enough to just put something down, if you really have a connection with what you're drawing,
Yeah.
something of the personality comes through, even if it doesn't look that realistic. That's my personal, I don't know, observation.
Susan wrote, one of my Amazons was bonded for many years. He died. She immediately moved on to my other mail. I call her the Black Widow.
Oh,
Well, that happens too.
great.
And Vicky wants to know, what projects are you working on now?
Oh, yeah, so I'm not really doing sort of this kind of original research anymore, but I am trying to write a book about grasslands as a ecosystem that we really all depend on more than we realize, and that's very threatened, much more so than, rainforests or something, which get a lot of attention. And that's mostly inspired by a lot of time I spent working with people on grasslands because of the research I was doing in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, and then in the US. And so the idea is to sort of talk about sustainable, environmentally friendly ranching practices and some of the history and ecology of grasslands, maybe with a bird's eye focus, from a bird's eye view, but in the spirit of something a bit more fun, like a Bill Bryson style travelogue, stories about the people that I made friends with in these places, and comparing maybe unlikely similarities, like the fact that a lot of my hosts and friends in Kenya and Zambia who have very British colonial roots love country and Western music and have very convergent attitudes to guns, horses, dogs, like the mix of breeds of dog that they tend to have very similar. Just very entertaining to me. So that's what I'm sort of working on, but got slightly derailed by pandemic and by child.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw something recently about Kenyans really being into country western music.
Right.
Wow. Yeah, are you involved at all in the Bobolink project? Speaking of grasslands.
Not directly, but Wendy Paulson is a big donor to the lab and sorry. And I guess to finish that thought, my current day job is in this part of the Lab of Ornithology called the Center for Conservation Media. So like I said at the beginning, we make films like the Scarlet Macaw one that you saw for conservation groups. And one of the biggest suite of projects I'm involved in is to do with grassland conservation. So we're not doing anything specifically with the Bobolink project right now. Is that, oh, maybe I'm getting a different Bobolink project.
Bobolink
You're
project.
talking about the one with Audubon and talking about mowing practices.
Right, it was started by Mass Audubon in
Yeah,
all of New England, and we basically,
absolutely.
people can donate money, as I
Yeah.
do every year, to
Yeah.
basically to keep farmers from mowing too early, because when they mow at their hay at the normal time, it just kills all the bobolinks and other birds like the meadowlarks that are nesting. But if they can wait, say, another 2 weeks, the birds can all hatch and fledge, and it saves, countless generations of these birds. So they can apply for grants to, they get a certain amount of money per acre to hold off mowing for a couple weeks till the birds fledge. And the amount of acres that get saved is directly dependent on how much money they can raise in donations to give to the farmers. So
it's funny you should ask that. One of the people I'm corresponding with right now is in charge of the land trust here and has been very active with the Bobolink project. And so yes, and we also have in a different part of the Lab of Ornithology, a group that's been working with undergraduates to document the impacts of different timing, the mowing at different times on birds like bobolinks that are breeding. So we did manage to get the Cornell Chronicle to cover a story that we were trying to make about Cornell community, interested in environment in different ways, coming together from different angles, carbon, the value of grasslands for carbon storage, the value of grasslands for grassland birds, and then the importance of grasslands like hay for the bottom line of essentially the vet school at Cornell, which has to, has to use that hay to cover the costs of a lot of things. And if they delay mowing by a couple of weeks, the nutritional value of the hay declines a lot, and how much you can sell the hay for declines. So it would be one solution is to have these offsets, these payments for delayed mowing, but it would be good to find another solution so that you can really scale this up, because you can't keep paying people to produce subpar hay. It's probably not going to be a solution that will apply very broadly to a lot of farmers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So something I'm also talking to someone at the agricultural extension at Cornell about that. Yeah, no resolution as yet.
That's unfortunate. Right. Do we have any other questions? And so I highly recommend the books. You can get them on Kindle or paper or hardback, and they're very easy to read and beautiful illustrations, and learn, Dr. Tong just touched briefly on different ways that birds involve themselves romantically, but if you read the book, you'll learn about all kinds of other ways that they get involved. I especially love the prairie chickens. They put all the fake prairie chickens near the loser guy, and suddenly he becomes the hot ticket. And the females are, oh, he must have something we don't realize, and they all run over to him. I think that's wonderful. I think humans do that a lot too. So I guess we can learn from that. Okay, any other questions, thoughts, comments? A lot of nice things about your talk in the chat. See. If not, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. This was very interesting and beautiful talk, and I love the work you're doing with the Mexican project. I wonder, by the way, have you worked at all with George Ola from Wildlife Messengers?
No. Thanks.
If you Google Wildlife Messengers, they make conservation films as well.
Great. Thank you.
George has come to talk to us a couple of times too. So, all right. Well, I want to thank everyone for coming and hope to see you next month. And I'm going to stop the recording.
Thank you, everyone.